Sustainability transformations are all about shaping futures and tackling questions of justice. Yet the future perspective and its justice implications often stay under the radar. At the Radboud University, researchers are diving into these issues to make them more explicit. I am Sietske Veeman, and together with Maria Kaufman from the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment, we explore how futures and justice intertwine in environmental governance. Maria is an expert on environmental justice and discourses, and I'm interested in futures and anticipation.
Shouldn't we first talk about why we spoke to the people?
Oh yeah, so let's start again.
Yeah. The last 4 weeks, we talked to 5 of our colleagues here at the Radboud University, the Institute of Management Sciences. And all these colleagues work on a part of the hotspot Transact, Transformations for Sustainability in Action. And they all work on sustainability transformations. So that includes climate change, energy transition, circular economy, biodiversity. And they all also work on futures and justice.
Because societal transformations are always about futures and justice. Because you want to go to a certain future which is more just and which is sustainable. And you anticipate, apparently, the way we're organizing things now is not going to lead to a sustainable future or sustainable futures or just futures. So always when you're working on societal transformations, you deal with futures and justice.
Yeah, but often this remains implicit.
Definitely, very much, yeah.
So the 5 people that we talked to, that included Vincent de Crooijert from the methods group of our faculty. Then we talked to his direct colleagues Femke Bekius and Perafan Chitra Pirom, who are also part of the methods group. We talked to Georges Schwitjes from business administration and Sander Lenvering from the spatial planning group and Christina Inoue from the environmental governance and politics group.
Our group, right?
Yes, environmental governance politics is indeed our group as well.
Yeah.
Where I was quite surprised is how there was quite some diversity on how they consider justice.
And futures.
And futures, yeah, indeed.
We saw the whole range, I think, including us. We saw the whole range of epistemology of futures, I think.
So what's an epistemology?
Epistemology is of futures is the extent to which you think you can know the future or what you could know about the future. So you could say that some people think, well, the future is uncertain, but we can say it's probable or less probable. It's probable this is going to happen. It's less probable that this is going to happen. So if you are on a environmental topic, you could say we are going to make the dikes this high, so it's improbable that we will be flooding. So you can say something about the future.
Yeah. So that's also a lot, when I hear you, it also has a lot to do with uncertainty reduction. And also I see that there's you can plan for the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then...
so that's the first one.
That's the first one.
What's the second one?
There's another one who says, well, you can't speak about different futures in terms of probable and improbable, but you should think about plausible futures. So there are several plausible futures. One is not more probable than the other. And you can navigate your way through time to reach a certain future. But you always have to take into account that it can be different. So you work with scenarios, for example.
Okay. So what's the third one?
The third one is more on the social constructivist side. Until now, it has been kind of a positivistic way of thinking. We can know the future. We just need better models. We just need to calculate it better or think harder, and then we can predict it or at least get some range of futures that are possible. The third one says it depends on the person. So every person has their own future in mind. There's not a range in which we will stay. And a classic method there, this epistemology is very common in sustainability studies. You imagine together with stakeholders different futures. It's to open up to alternative futures than the one that we're heading for now.
Okay, so it's more about pluralistic futures.
It's about pluralistic futures, yeah.
So, and then there's the last one.
Yeah, then there's the last one. I will also explain the last one. So the last one is saying, well, the future is performativity. The future is uncertain. You cannot know anything about the future. If you say something about the future, it's just a product in the now to mobilize certain people, and you should be aware that you privilege some groups by one image of the future, by using one image of the future, and you will probably silence others by pushing this future to the front.
Sounds like more a critical approach.
It's definitely a critical approach. And then maybe it's nice to make a link to one of the surprising things I heard is the system dynamic approach of Vincent de Gooijer.
Yes.
Which was really interesting because with this system dynamic, you think with experts and policymakers in a structured way about consequences, causal relations. And by having such a diverse range of people, they could also think very well about consequences of interventions.
Yeah, like unintended consequences. And
also, yeah.
And we see, a different type of understanding emerging. We see how, so there's technology that needs to be implemented. And when is it going to be implemented? If there's a business case. When is there a business case? Well, that will not emerge automatically because it's about avoiding negative externalities. It's about avoiding CO2 emissions that are now either cheap or free to emit. So there will not be a business case if we don't have policies that assign a value to that negative externality. And what will determine whether we will assign that value to the negative externality? It's a societal process in which society decides, okay, which value do we attach to that? How much money do we value avoiding those CO2 emissions compared to using that money to do other stuff?
Yes, he's the epistemological one, right? So he says probable and improbable futures.
I think he was on the probable and improbable, yeah, because he was also thinking with policymakers and other experts how to navigate to one desired future. And there was really a path that they would try to follow to reach that future.
Yeah, and I also found it's interesting with the system dynamics. I understood that the first step was that you come together and map basically the causal relationships between the whole system, basically, and then also find really consensus on something.
Yeah, they went on until they agreed.
We try to look at the bigger picture, at the whole. We don't want to reduce because there are certain characteristics, very important characteristics, that determine whether in the end we have a just transformation or not, that you can only see if you look at the whole system. You cannot simply add up all those isolated experiments and then think you know how the system will behave. Because the behavior of the system on the level of the whole system is something that emerges if you put all those things together, and that you won't see if you only study the details in isolation. Okay, if we do what happens next. It has a very explicit view on time, looking back into the history, what caused this problem in the past. Also looking forward, thinking about, okay, now if we change something, what else will change?
Yeah.
So it increases the likelihood that you will already think about what would otherwise be unintended consequences and try to mitigate them through additional policies that help to alleviate those.
So Vincent also mentioned that they work with Earth justice and that this is an important issue. But I always got a feeling there's this idea that there's at one point that there's one goal of a just future, a just transformation that we can agree on and that we then can operationalize and measure and work towards to. And I found this was still different than some of the others.
Yeah, yeah.
So we try to map the complexity of the system together. So this is a relatively neutral or objective, you could say, as far as possible, because you talk about how do we think that the world works. If A goes up, what happens to B and C and
do we try to get a common understanding of how the world works, or do we allow different?
No, we try to reach consensus. So if there's a conflicting view on causal relationships, we go into that discussion until it's resolved. And that often luckily also happens. Because we have a very systematic way of approaching such discussions, we often end up with resolving those conflicting views.
So this more singular perspective of justice kind of goes hand in hand with this first epistemology of futures.
Yeah, and I think also if we are in the realm of policy making, I can imagine that policymakers who often search something concrete, that this is helping, that could be helpful for them as well.
We focus on building a model, building a diagram that shows the complex reality that we have to deal with. And then the later stage is more focused on using that model. Okay, what is now the best thing to do to make this desired future happen? Then we encourage people to use that model that we built collectively and that we all committed to. This is our new shared understanding of the situation. Yeah, now we can just imagine that we implement a solution and follow the arrows in the diagram to then think through, okay, what would happen if we take this action? So that's how we then try to use the results of the earlier phases in the later phase.
Would you place Femke and Berafan also in between?
Yes, I would, but I do think in comparison to maybe Sander and Josh, they are maybe still slightly more on the second one. They have this visioning framework, which I think is very interesting, where you come together with stakeholders and develop a joint vision.
Yeah, but they also really said there is room for alternative ideas. Yeah, and there's room for conflict. I think she mentioned.
I think the conflict was even very important in their approach.
Yeah, while Vincent tried to resolve the conflict, it was also there, which is good because conflict means learning, maybe, in the end. But they were really looking for a consensus. Femke and Berafan were also looking for consensus, but my feeling was that there was a bit more space for conflict.
And letting it unresolved.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Although a decision must be made at the end.
We're trying to find the optimal solution, but the optimal solution for every stakeholder is different. So there is not one, there are multiple, optimal ways. So there are multiple futures where they want to go. And there are also multiple ways in how to get to these. All these stakeholders have a different view on the problem, a different perspective, a different aim. And some things might overlap, of course. And it's also needed in a way to get these actors maybe reaching consensus. But they start from a different, perspective. And I think what is powerful in the methods that we use is that we try to bring these perspectives together and see whether we can maybe come to a more overarching perspective and maybe formulate a vision. But in principle, they start with a different future.
But couldn't these different visions and goals that they have also be contradicting?
Sure, they are.
Yeah. So how do you deal with this?
Well, I think sometimes even also explicating that you have a conflicting aim is, insightful. So I use game theory models, which is also often about conflict. So you can model the different objectives and preferences of the actors and actually show, if you formalize it as such, then you want this outcome and you want this outcome. Well, but that's not going to work if we both have to transform the system towards a more sustainable system, because then these paths will not coincide. And maybe in some situation it can be. So actually you can define a path where these conflicting interests can be aligned. Yeah, but I think the first thing is realizing that these conflicts are there. And having people at the same place and speaking out to each other, we are on these different paths is already, one step ahead.
And hidden conflicts is even actually more, I think, can be hinder the progress because you don't know one aware until actually you would get down to do something.
So, but I still would put them more into, I would put them somewhere in between, but maybe a little bit more to the plausible futures than necessarily the pluralistic futures, because there's still very much work on one goal.
Yeah. Really, I look at decision-making processes and how these things evolve. I mean, these decisions are long-term and far in the future. But decisions need to be taken now because it takes time before things get implemented. But also, the world is changing. It's all dynamic. Decisions evolve over time. The idea of durability is actually saying, a decision is durable at this moment in time, when both the long-term and the short-term aspects are aligned among all the actors involved.
And this is what Sander also said, right? Policymakers have to make decisions at a certain point in time. So it's nice that everybody has different perspectives, but they need to build something. I think this was literally what he said.
I'm not that focused on the making futures, but more on contrasting to, well, let's say the visioning of futures, more what would be alternative ways of looking at the future, and how can we sort of take a different path. It might be role play. It might be that you have to play a role as a certain person with a certain profile, that helps up to open up, these people exist as well. But also seeing the outcomes and perhaps what if and play through the what if questions. So what if, you could be very concrete. What if we increase the price of fuels, just in general? Or what if we make it mandatory to only build social housing for the next 20 years?
So in this way, you do think about the consequences, where we talked about in the beginning, right? So is it the use of futures, or do you also think about the consequences? And in this game, there's also some kind of making of futures.
But often these what-if questions are fueled by, I guess, for example, a justice principle.
Well, I don't think I would position Sander as Sander Lenverink at a first epistemology perspective towards futures. You wouldn't? I wouldn't, no. I think with his stakeholder approach and trying to let stakeholders open up to different futures, so acknowledging this plurality of future, but still navigating to one sustainable city.
Yeah, second or third even, but then...
but it's third then because he does it together with other people and he envisions one future.
Yes, indeed.
I'm not that focused on the making futures, but more on contrasting to, well, let's say the visioning of futures, more what would be alternative ways of looking at the future, and how can we sort of take a different path. It might be role play. It might be that you have to play a role as a certain person with a certain profile, that helps up to open up, these people exist as well. But also seeing the outcomes and perhaps what if and play through the what if questions. So what if, you could be very concrete. What if we increase the price of fuels, just in general? Or what if we make it mandatory to only build social housing for the next 20 years?
So in this way, you do think about the consequences, where we talked about in the beginning, right? So is it the use of futures, or do you also think about the consequences? And in this game, there's also some kind of making of futures.
But often these what-if questions are fueled by, I guess, for example, a justice principle. So inviting the actual people that it concerns is one of the main challenges, actually. So we often resort to just either inviting representative bodies for, let's say we've done some research with the oogvereniging, so the people that have a visual impairment. So we ask that society or that association to represent that interest. The same with asking the GGD, for example, for sort of health-related concerns, or asking Rover, the representative body of the people that travel through public transit. So, but it's always representations of, and that's one of the main challenges, actually, because it's very difficult to identify the people that stay at home because they don't have access.
I think with Sander was interesting. He was really searching in his research on transport justice. He was really searching for the alternatives that also break through the efficiency and neoliberal approach to transport management. So in that sense, he really searched for the alternatives. Yeah. But at the end of the day, he also is a spatial planner. And I think it was interesting to see how he said, like, okay, all these different, but at the end of the day, you have to do something. You have to make a decision.
Yeah.
So you have to bring it back to this consensus.
Yeah. When you compare them to Femke and Berenfan, he was more sustainability driven than the other two. And George also had this normative, he didn't call it normative, but his some kind of direction that he thought it would be good that society is going towards. And of course, this third epistemology derives from sustainability research. I think this kind of aligns with what Schurz said. Took the book of Schurz, its framing of the economy of the future. And like you said, I think there's a nice link to Schurz, which I think was sitting in Epistemology 3.
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely.
He saw these different futures in the present, different economies in his book. In the present.
Dweilen met de kraan open. So we're cleaning with the tap still open.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all thinking from our own mental minds, which we actually develop in this sector, in this society. Yeah, and if you want to change this way, maybe it's nice. The problems of today cannot be solved with the way that generated those problems. So, and then maybe connecting it, and that was my point on with the tap open, connecting it to the next generation.
He used framing. And framing is, of course, also a very nice concept in which you can combine the use of futures and the making of futures. A frame is basically built around the expectation of a certain future, of an or an assumption of a certain future. But by putting this to the front, you frame a problem in a certain way, based upon your expected future. And all kind of consequences come from this. People act in a certain way because they have a certain frame on a problem. And this is what Schurz very nicely showed in his book and also talked about, that we could change these frames according to transdisciplinary research.
Yes, that's true. But I also liked about Schur's approach was that he was very much against this binary of black and white, or saying like we all need to stop eating meat or we all need to stop flying. So I think, yes, environmental scholars can maybe sometimes come across a little bit what? No,
not like this.
Yeah. Like this, a little bit focused. Let's call it focused and single-minded in their approach. So I think his approach really showed what you just said, the pluralistic third epistemology of justice, because he very much didn't want to force anyone to agree on something. He just wants to get people and their different opinions and perspectives on the future together.
Yeah, but not only, get them together, but also open up different futures than the one we are headed to.
Oh, definitely.
Like this third epistemology, he was really trying to find alternatives to the way we organize things now.
The new economy, we cannot envision it ourselves because we're too much stuck in the old economy. It's happening in Amsterdam, where you have students sit together and in some kind of brainstorm, what is the world you want to live in? Okay, let's do this kind of education. Yeah, more this envisioning education, I have to tell you. Nothing about futuring. So let them really start to think in a different way, because what we're still doing, and not only in universities, but also in University of Applied Science, and it's all based on ready-made knowledge, and it's not pushing them to really to think.
Yeah, if there was one person with a lot of pluralism, it was Christina.
Yes.
With a pluriverse.
Yes, indeed.
Who am I to say, okay, if someone says that the river is their grandfather, who am I to say the river is just a river?
Yeah.
And why my conception of river is more true than saying the river is my relative. I don't know. It's just a way of really rethinking things, and that I cannot really explain, because we are educated to say that these kind of views are myths or are just anecdotes or stories or whatever. It's very hard to, as you would say here in the operationalize it. Because if we operationalize it, it will be something that we put in our own framework. Right?
Yeah. So Christina working with indigenous communities in the Amazon forest, where the idea of the pluriverse and other ways of thinking on ontology.
So that's the thing. So it's not only having a room with several worldviews and suddenly we find a way to deliberate and see who is right, who is wrong. But really to acknowledge that sometimes some things are so different that it's impossible even to find this common ground.
And I found an interesting point that she brought in, like the others who who involved participants in their methods and stakeholders, I think it was still, and I don't mean this negative, but in a still functionalistic way. So we include different stakeholders, we try to come to a consensus, and we basically also want to have support for certain measures. And I think Christina's approach, or Christina's examples, were very much about there was more power to the local indigenous.
Another anthropologist says that it's possible to have a pragmatic agreement in which, for instance, biologists that will talk about species and conservation quotas or whatever, and local traditional people will talk about other beings that are the stewards of that area, and they can find an agreement to how to conserve species in that particular space.
All the other people working with participatory approaches wanted to include others that were not obvious as well, but still interesting for the topic, but they didn't really know how, right? Sander, for example, really said, yeah, there are people not there we would like to have on the table, but we don't know how. And I think Femke and Berafar also said it, and Vincent also said this. So this is just a problem in science nowadays with participatory approaches, is who to include, and if you know who to include, how to include them. Also to get these silent discourses, which are still silent discourses, a voice. So also these unoutspoken futures that are there, but we don't know they're there because the people are not part of the negotiations or part of the conversation. This is, I thought, was really interesting. And this concept of
this relational approach.
This relational approach was really interesting. If you work with indigenous people, that you build a relation with them, but then according to their terms and to our terms, like not our terms. This is the law. I've got right to this. This is my responsibility. This is yours, and now we're going to do it like this and this and this, and sign here, and it's fine. Exaggerated, of course. But she said they have different terms. You should eat their food. You should stay for a few days in their village. You should listen to the children. You should take care of the elderly. Yep. And only if you've done that for a few days, then you go and discuss whatever you want to discuss. And I think there's a fair point at this. Absolutely. Yeah. So the concept of duration was nice. Also to link this long-term aspect with the short-term aspect.
Yeah, I think it was interesting, and I think it would also place Femke and Perafan a little bit more in number 2, because it basically emphasizes reflexivity.
Very good point.
That because they had this mix between, on the one hand, an adaptive planning approach that you, and on the other hand, the durability. And the way I understood it, they argued that decisions made in the now should be durable on the short term because they are aligned with different interests of people and with expectations of the future. But then something might happen, like a crisis or a pandemic, which leads to a disalignment of these different interests, and then adaptive planning comes in to align them again. I mean, that's of course a very conceptual and theoretical thinking, but I think it's quite interesting to say also with regards to reflexivity. So I think the research that we've done together in the past, we are the fourth one.
Yeah, yes, with the narratives and the discourses and the use of futures to see the future as a motivation to do something or not do something. This is the fourth one, and of course it's a gradual scale, and you're always in all epistemologies one way or another, but this fourth one is a bit different because you dare really take the future to the present and see what it does. So in every epistemology it's always, I think, especially for policymakers, it's always a good addition to think this way.
Yeah, I think also our research on either the energy transition in the Netherlands, or we also analyzed the narratives surrounding the loss and damage debate. I think for me it was really an eye-opening experience that we, because normally in the loss and damage debate, for example, you would expect that, or the scientific consensus is very much developed countries in the so-called developed countries in the so-called global north should pay developing countries in the so-called global south for the climate damages. But when we analyzed the comments to newspaper articles, we realized that citizens had quite different views on sometimes even said like, no, the global north shouldn't pay for this. And they used the future to legitimize and justify their position, right? So they said like, no, these countries will pollute more in the future. So we don't need to pay them because they will be the polluter in the future.
Another article we wrote on the energy transition and images that citizens have of the future and images that are used in policy, I think would be more at the third one to show like, hey, different people have different futures and you cannot grade them or say this is more important or this is less important. And also to show that policymakers or policy is not always aware of all these different futures, individual futures that are also out there and that people also act upon. So even though you don't know them or you don't agree, it's still something that's out there that mobilizes people to debate. And I think this fourth epistemology is a nice one if you look at future studies and the discipline of anticipation, that future studies are really looking at this is the now and there's the future and what can we say about the future with scientific thinking. And that developed over time, of course. But this anticipation discipline is making the connection to the now. So there are futures there. So now what can we do now? Both in using futures, how do we use futures to create something we want, or how do we use futures to stay away something that we don't want? And every action we take in the making of futures, what kind of consequences can we oversee and what kind of unintended consequences are there?
I think what this session and these interviews highlighted for me again is that even if we don't explicitly work with futures and justice, our decisions, our actions that we do in our work as researchers, but also every day in life, will have justice implications and will have implications for the future. So in that sense, people can not be interested in that, but they still implicitly will work on it.
Yes. I did a nice day of reflection today. Okay, so now what do we do?